Guys, some craziness has happened, something I would never have expected. The state of Florida, in fact, not just state of Florida, Jimmy Patronis himself actually signed something that is good for policyholders. It's unbelievable. So there is an emergency rule that was signed yesterday that basically takes into account everything that was said on that awesome 60 Minutes episode and the Washington Post article from Brianna Sachs that talks about what the whistleblowers had described. The insurance companies were changing estimates. They were deleting photos. They were removing captions on photos. They were doing inexplicable things. In order to combat that, the CFO office actually wrote an emergency rule that went into effect for Hurricane Helene and Hurricane, what's the most recent hurricane name? I was just in it. Hurricane Milton. Good old Milton. Hurricane Milton. In this rule, they actually described everything that the insurance companies were doing as fraud. He said, and I quote, greater transparency will reduce post-storm fraud. And the only people he's talking about are insurance adjusters and insurance companies. Now, he didn't say insurer fraud like he should have, like the APA has been saying, American Policyholder Association, and how they said that all over that 60 Minutes episode. But they at least called it fraud, and that's awesome. So here are the basic requirements. New requirement number 1, for every adjuster that is preparing and submitting a written estimate, you cannot change these requirements, by the way. They cannot be waived by either the insurance company or the policyholder. These are requirements that are set in stone. If they're going to write an estimate, they must utilize an electronic estimating program, such as Xactimate or Symbility. It doesn't specify those two, but it describes them, that itemizes and sets pricing consistent with the local market area pricing. And that program has to have its pricing structure updated at least once a month. So if it doesn't do that, maybe right after a storm, it's not updating its pricing fast enough, maybe that could be an issue for them. And it says that if the insurance company or the adjuster modifies anything in that program at all, anything, then the carrier must produce some kind of documentation that explains why that modification is required and produce additional documentation that proves that it applies local market data pricing. So they might not be able to give you pricing from Material Supply Warehouse or someplace like that, because that pricing structure that's built into Xactimate or Symbility, they can't manipulate the pricing for equipment, materials, labor, or supplies without that additional documentation. And they have to give additional documentation on every line item they change. They won't be modifying Xactimate and Symbility anymore. It's freaking awesome. It's freaking awesome. Jimmy, thank you. This is a big win. It goes further. Not only can they not modify the program, they also can't modify the initial estimate without specifying why they made the change, with full documentation for every single individual change that they make and who made the change. And they have to submit that variation report at the same time that they provide the estimate. So if the policyholder gets an estimate, if it's been modified at all, there's a variation report that goes with it. And every adjuster has to keep a copy of every single variation separately. They legally have to keep copies. We will have extreme amount of transparency. I'm thrilled. This is a big one for policyholders. It's a big, big win. The only issue with this emergency rule is that it only applies to Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. We need to make it a permanent thing. And we need this to apply across the board in all the states. So, Jimmy, I applaud you for making this emergency rule. I understand that you had to tie it to some kind of an emergency to make this work. This is great. Well done, sir. Well done. That's it. That's Breaking Bull.